Hello, I'm Steve Cassano, State Senator from the 4th District, and this is another version of Focus on the 4th, where we talk about issues that are important to the state of Connecticut, and particularly to us who live in the 4th District, Manchester, Glastonbury, Bolton, and Andover. I'm quite excited today to have a very special guest. She's a new commissioner here, Myra Jones-Taylor. I told her if I went through all of her resume, we would use all 24 minutes here. Has a brilliant background, working in the area of early childhood. The governor has made it clear from his first day that we needed to do things differently as far as children going to school and children having a fair chance in school. And I think, Myra, you're going to have a major role in making that happen. I can tell you, as one that runs a daycare center, my wife runs it, I do the bills, but I'm near enough to know about it. It's fascinating to see the difference in preparation that children have. And even more fascinating to see that when they have proper educational training, how quickly they catch up. Our system, unfortunately, in the state of Connecticut, our kids are so far behind that it takes years to catch up, and it's discouraging, and many give up. So I think that's why you're on board, and I am thrilled to have you. I've spent a lot of time this morning reading over your resume. I've talked with others that know what you've done in New Haven and so on. I'm a sociologist, so you know, we come along and think in the same way. So my first real question is, you've got many challenges. Tell me, first of all, in your words, a little about your background, your goals, and how we approach that, and take some time and walk through that.
Sure. So it's an honor to sit across from another qualitative researcher from a social scientist. That doesn't always happen. I didn't realize that. So we have many things in common.
Yes.
So I came to this by accident, really. I was doing research thinking about poverty in New Haven, and this was right around the time of welfare reform. It had been 10 years since welfare reform had happened. And I was really interested to know how were families doing as a result of this. And I interviewed several people through Jobs First and different job training programs and women and in education, and they said, you have to understand childcare. You really need to understand early care and education if you want to understand how we're going to shrink poverty. So after several people telling me that, and that became the basis of many interviews, I said, okay, what's going on here? And so I started looking at early care and education, and I spent a lot of time with early care and education providers, home-based providers, center-based providers, and school-based providers to understand what it was about their work that made people so excited and gave them this sense of hope when it comes to shrinking poverty, when it comes to shrinking the achievement gap. So I wrote my dissertation on the effects of early care and education and the reforms that were happening, the changes that were happening to that field, and how it was going to improve the lives of children and families. And I focused in New Haven, Connecticut. I have all of these fancy degrees, but my mother will always say that the most important education I ever received was at this little community preschool, where I was encouraged to be creative and curious. I developed a love for reading at an early age, and she really thinks that was the foundation for everything that I have done since. So I come to it through a kind of a natural interest and then a research-based interest.
In your research, you know that we have the ongoing discussion of home care versus centers and smaller facilities and so on. We have a lot of people that have home care that basically babysit children.
Right.
We have people that have home care that really do try and educate children. I remember my wife saying that education starts when they're born, that between music and things like that, a child can always be educated. Did you find that in your research? Absolutely.
I found there, just as you said, there are providers who are really, just kind of doing the basics. And I think that's often because they haven't been exposed to all of the resources that we have available. And it's been a sector that's been ignored, really, the home-based providers. It's just babysitting. But now that we have research, neuroscience, we have all this research that's coming out about the earliest years, about exactly what your wife said, that babies are born learning. Some people will even say it happens prenatally, the baby Einstein or those things that people, talking to your baby, reading to your baby in utero is helping to develop those synapses. And so as we have that research and we start talking to home-based providers, center-based providers, school-based providers and saying, this is the time to capitalize on children's development, we can actually see changes in practice. And so what we're doing in the Office of Early Childhood is to ensure that every sector has access to high quality training, because parents have choice. We want to encourage parents to choose if it's a home-based provider or any other type of provider, but that they're guaranteed that wherever they send their child, it's of the highest quality. But you're absolutely right. There is great variability, and so our job is to reach out and encourage those people who really want to pursue the academic, the cognitive skills, the social emotional skills, and that development, promote that development in children. But then other providers who really maybe aren't interested in that, find other activities for them to do.
Sure, sure. We are, I believe, the third or fourth state in the country to develop a program like this. What have you found out about the other three, and are they doing similar things, different things? Are you communicating? How is it working? It's got to be fun starting from scratch.
It is a gift. I mean, there are many challenges that come with bringing 5 different programs from 5 different agencies into a new agency. I won't be Pollyanna-ish. It's a challenge at times. But there are 3 other states in the country that have done this: Georgia, Massachusetts, and Washington. And so relying on them, looking to them, and hopefully getting together as kind of a cohort. It's nice that they're a little more advanced than us, so really learning from them. But what we know is that when you we know the brain research, we know that the earliest years are critical years, but we don't have policy that reflects that. So what we've done in Connecticut is say, let's actually act on this research at the governmental level, at the state level. And so we've integrated these programs, because we know that if we streamline, if we make these programs more efficient, if we actually make it easier for providers to do their work of educating and caring for children, and home visitors to go out and go to vulnerable families, if we streamline those processes, we improve outcomes for young children, because the people on the ground are doing what they're supposed to be doing, helping children and families. And then by doing that, we see much greater improvements throughout society. We know that children that have had access to high quality early experiences through home visiting or early care and education, they are more likely to own a home. They are more likely to vote and be civically engaged. They are less likely to get pregnant as teenagers. They're less likely to do risky behavior like drugs. So we know that this actually makes a difference 20, 30 years out. And so that's what we're doing at the Office of Early Childhood, is actually streamlining what we do at the state so that providers can be more effective.
And by streamlining, you've consolidated, you said, I think, 5 agencies. So I assume that this, in one way, brings about savings, but in a more important way, brings about a sharing of knowledge and a consolidation. Should end a lot of duplication.
It's exactly, you clearly get it. It's so nice talking to you, a like-minded person here. That's exactly right. When you bring people together who've all been thinking about young children, but thinking about them separately, and you get them together as staff and say, this is our goal, to improve outcomes for young children. How do we do it together? And you find all these light bulbs start flashing all the time. Oh, I didn't know you did that. That works well with what we're doing over here. And you get that synergy, and you start to have changes and the way we can relate to programs out in the field.
Great, great. We've got about 3 minutes left, so I'll ask you 3 priorities.
Sure.
3 priorities in 3 minutes. What do you really hope to get done in this first year?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say the first is streamlining our early care and education delivery system. We have multiple ways of getting young children into care, multiple funding streams, multiple eligibility requirements, and really saying, we know children thrive in high quality settings. How can we get rid of all of these different processes and get one system to be more efficient? So that's one. I would say the other is expanding access to high quality care. So as we're streamlining, making sure that we expand access. The governor and the legislature are very committed to this. And so we've expanded by 1,000 opportunities this year, and we will hope to do that. We'll plan to do that for the next 3 years. So expanding access. And then I would say universal screening is something that we know makes a huge difference towards closing that achievement gap in particular, that children who have been screened for developmental delays, social emotional challenges, if they have that screening earlier, we can address those challenges with early interventions far more effectively than if they get to kindergarten or 3rd grade and those delays are identified. So I'd say those 3.
Those are major. And if the universal screening, if we can identify children and get them into an education program, at 3 years old, as the governor is shooting for, then in effect, we're probably going to reduce a lot of those deficiencies that generally have been occurring.
That's right. We see research after research shows that children who have been given access to early interventions, like our Birth to 3 system, you actually shrink the number of children who need special education later on.
Right. Great. All right, we're going to take a quick break and come back in a couple of minutes, and this has been great. Welcome back to the second half of Focus on the Fourth. My guest today is Dr. Myra Jones-Taylor. She's our Executive Director of the new Office of Early Childhood. We had a great discussion as to some of her challenges and some of the goals. We're talking a little about identifying some of the issues that children have. We know in the more affluent towns, it's a lot easier for children to get in and have the opportunity they need without a lot of push, perhaps. Perhaps parents more aware of the need and everything else. What do you find in the larger cities, the Bridgeports, the New Havens, the Hartfords? Is it more difficult to get these young threes into the system? And what do we need to do that?
You know, it's a complicated situation in that I think increasingly we hear parents across the board of all socioeconomic levels recognizing the importance of early care and education, of those early years. It's interesting now that there are a lot of people who recognize that. Not enough. We still need to get out there and saturate communities. I talk about that a lot, of saturating communities with the importance of the early years. And so that's one. But I think there are families who know and recognize the importance of this in our low-income communities but don't have access. So they are clamoring to get into these programs, and then they find that they're not available to them because they're too expensive, or because they would have to take 5 buses to get there, if you will. And this is also a case in rural communities. That's another challenge, is just getting to the place. So I think as we drive up interest, we need to make sure that we have the capacity to meet that demand.
So are we going to try to have these programs available in our basic local neighborhood schools?
Yes, and our neighborhood schools, our community-based programs, home-based providers, making sure that they are equipped with all the training to provide high-quality care. So really it's a multifaceted, multi-sector endeavor.
Some of the concerns, obviously, you've heard from the home-based providers, that and those that have daycares, large daycares, 50, 70, 100 people. Already they've lost their kindergartens, basically, because we've gone to the 4-year-old kindergarten, and they're concerned about their futures. Is there a way that this program will tie the home-based programs in so that they can survive?
So we're working on a few things that I think are very promising, and that is to actually connect the public schools, the community-based programs, and the home-based programs to each other. One thing I often say and believe very strongly is that once children get to kindergartens, it doesn't matter where they receive their early care and education. They are that public school's group of children, and it's in their best interest to make sure that they connect to the providers that have been providing the care, early care and education experiences for their children who enter their kindergarten classrooms. And so having training that's appropriate for the different sectors, but that they're all connected and they all are thinking about our early learning and development standards, for example. Those, we just developed those. We've gotten those out to home-based providers, public schools, libraries, community-based providers. Those are the groundwork for what we want to see in terms of children's development and the instructional practices that should go along with that. So making sure everybody is aware of those. That's just one way to connect them.
And it seems, I know just from our own place that many of our staff that have been there for a while, the accreditation program, I guess you should talk a little about the accreditation program. People are working harder to do their job better.
Yes. Yes, this is something I found a lot in my research, and I see this every day with our work now, is that we are increasing the standards. We know that this is important work. We know now, because of all the research, that this is not just babysitting, if you will, and so we need to make sure that we have highly trained, highly skilled providers. But at the same time, we need to make sure that they're supporting them. We're not just putting standards upon them without actually giving them the support to meet those standards. Mm-hmm. So that's a big part of the work as well.
I imagine you've had discussions with Senator Bai several times over this. Senator Bai and my wife began a lot of this together, and one of the questions that came up with accreditation, we were accredited, many of the places were accredited. The cost of accreditation at the national level was outrageous, particularly for reaccreditation. Mm-hmm. For everybody to continue here, they need to be accredited, which I think is terrific. Why can't there be a Connecticut accreditation? Is there something that they're looking at, or do we have to be tied in with the U.S. standards, which most centers can't afford?
It's an interesting question. We have in Connecticut, I'm very proud of this, we are #1 in the nation in terms of the number of early care and education providers or centers that are accredited. #1 by proportion. So for every the population, we have a high rate of accreditation. We're #3 in the country in terms of just sheer numbers. The numbers of programs that are actually accredited. So this is something we should be very proud of. And I think I would caution of creating our own accreditation system, and that we have these national standards. We are considered a leader in the country in terms of this. That we have by proportion the highest number of NIAC accredited, National Association for the Education of Young Children, accredited programs, and then third in sheer numbers, just behind California and Massachusetts, which have much bigger populations than we do. So we are not working on a Connecticut-based accreditation, but what we are doing is creating a system, a quality improvement system, that provides a lot of support for providers to go through that accreditation process so that they're not doing it alone. So it's actually a great thing that we have such high numbers of accredited programs. I know it's expensive, but we see that this is a great marketing tool for programs, that they can say, we have done this, we are the gold standard in terms of quality. And
I believe that the part of your overall program and funding is to help defer some of those costs for that training and so on.
That's right.
Is that correct?
So focusing on the programs that receive state funds, that's our focus right now, and then making sure that they get that access. And then as we're expanding 4,000 opportunities in the next 4 years, that we bring more programs into the fold, so that this isn't just the same programs that have always been getting support. They continue to get support, but we reach out beyond our usual suspects, if you will, and make sure they have access.
We had a commissioner of higher education probably 6, 8, 10 years ago, I'm not even sure when Val retired, Valerie Lewis. And she said that within the next 20 years, 40% of the jobs in the state of Connecticut will come from the 5 central cities. And I don't know if Connecticut ever really understood that message. And it seems that this program is one of the first attempts to deal with the reality of that. How long will it take where we can get children into the system, that they're going to be at the same level that kids in the smaller towns and so on are, knowing Val's comments?
Yeah.
It's a complicated question, but
it is. You know, this is part of the pipeline. You know, we have, you know, this birth to 20 or P20. We have this P20 Council pre-K to 20, and we need to make sure that we are aligning all of our work so that what we're doing for the youngest children is supported and continues to grow in public schools, and then they get into higher ed. We know that there's something called fade out, that there's a concern that you have this great high quality early care and education experience and then it fades out in public school. And that's not because early care and education programs aren't good. It's because we need to make sure that we're building on that throughout the K-12 system. And that's not to say that public education isn't good, but they're not always aligned. So making sure that we have that growth and it goes all the way into college. Part of that is aligning our systems and aligning our information of how it is best to support young children's development and then beyond into college.
And you mentioned college. Are we getting the necessary number of students enrolled in the early childhood ed program so that we can in fact be able to provide the staff necessary to keep this program going?
That is a great question. As we're building capacity, it's not just about facilities, it's about a highly skilled workforce. And so I am encouraged to see the numbers of providers, of students who are going into early care and education. But we need to do better. And part of that is by honoring the work and really showing that this is the most critical part of a child's development, and honoring that through highly skilled workforce and training.
And you mentioned facilities. There are few, if any, public school systems that have the facilities for 3-year-olds, safety-wise, or bathrooms, everything.
Right.
I believe part of the program is to maybe use the private sector in some ways and to partner with them and expand the partnership so that we don't lose these children and we don't lose those opportunities. Is that correct?
So the agency is working on many things to build capacity in our early care education facilities. We have over the next 3 or 4 years, about $37 million in bond funds are going to improve community-based programs through capital improvements. So new security systems, new windows, new heating and cooling systems. We also have, through Smart Start, this new program that was legislated this year, we will be expanding into public schools that would volunteer to do this. And there are $10 million annually set aside in bond funds for them to change their facilities, retrofit them to meet the needs of 3- and 4-year-olds. So there's a lot going on in terms of facility improvements so that we can meet the need.
Yeah, and I'm concerned, we're always concerned about first graders with fifth graders or sixth graders. I'm concerned about 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds with third and fourth graders and so on. So the challenges you have before you, the separation that you need is phenomenal. So we got about a minute left. What would you want to say in your last minute, and what kind of a message do you have? Maybe we could get in touch with you, or if people needed to get in touch with you.
First of all, thank you for this opportunity. The more we share these ideas, the more people are really thinking about early childhood, the better off we are as a society. We have a lot going on in our agency. We have a wonderful new website, a lot that reflects a lot of the work that we're doing. You can go to ct.gov/OEC to find out information from is your child developing, to licensing standards, and a lot of things in between, our home visiting services. You can also go to United Way's 211, where there's a wealth of information about many things for young children and families, childcare, but also if you need housing assistance, if you need heat assistance, many things that families rely on, they can go to 211. So go there, get a lot of information, and I look forward to the next year of doing a lot more and saturating communities with information about early childhood.
All right, great. And we'll make sure we put those numbers on the bottom of the screen, and I'm going to ask you to hopefully come back and do this again in maybe 6 months, talk a little more about the Smart Start, where we're making progress, where we need help, where the communities themselves can do more. So I think that reinforcement is going to be important. Look forward to seeing you again and do this.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.